Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Montero with Strongtown Chicago, and this is our Speaker Series podcast where we try to highlight urbanist voices making a difference in Chicago. Today, we're going to have a conversation about adaptive reuse, and specifically the adaptive reuse of Overton Elementary School, one of Chicago's public schools that was sold in 2013 and is currently being repurposed for other uses. I have two guests with me today. Ghian Foreman, he is the head of the Washington Park Development Group, leading the project to repurpose and redevelop the school. And we have Paola Aguirre Serrano, who is a partner with Borderless Studio and an urban designer. And I'm going to speak with both of them about how this project is different from some other adaptive reuse projects and some of the interesting opportunities with these kinds of properties in the city. So Ghian and Paola, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I wanted to start off setting the ground for how Overton Elementary came to be an adaptive reuse project. As we just mentioned, the city of Chicago sold off a lot of its public schools, previously functioning as CPS, Chicago Public Schools, in 2013. That was a controversial decision at the time, and one of the outcomes of it was trying to figure out what are we going to use these buildings for and how can they be an asset to the community. Ghian, can you talk a little bit about how you approached this project when you found out that the sale was happening and how that context has informed the path you've been on since then?
Sure. So when I heard about the school closings, obviously it was controversial to everyone, to me as well. But being a real estate developer, my first instinct was to just kind of look and see where these were located. So kind of took a look at several of them. But Overton really stood out to me for a couple of reasons. One, in the heart of Bronzeville, historic African-American neighborhood. As it turns out, my grandmother actually used to live in what's now a vacant lot that's directly next door to the school. I had an aunt who taught at the school when I was a kid. But I remembered how beautiful the building was. Paola can talk about the architectural style of it, but it's all glass. And I always felt like, wow, I wonder what it would have been like to have been a kid going to school here. So much light coming into the building, very different from where I went to school. And so just kind of started doing some research on it, asked my architects, hey, could this be a historic building? And immediately they said, yes, it could. To be classified as historic, it has to meet certain criteria. And so, we said, hey, let's take a look at this. In general, my feeling was that the closing of the schools was going to be the biggest transference of wealth that I probably would see in my lifetime. Not just a monetary part, but if you think about the impact that schools have on lives, on families, on communities, I thought that just from a wealth perspective, that this was going to be huge. So we decided to buy the school. The original thought that we had was live, work, right? Someone who wants to have their own podcast. You can have a place where you can live and you can be there. An urban designer, you can have your own place where you can live and you can work there as well. The numbers didn't quite work financially for us to do it at that time. We could have made condos, but I thought that was going to be taking it away from the public if we did that. So we made the decision and pursued the ability to set up it as offices geared towards small businesses, nonprofits, arts, business, technology, some things that would help to really advance the community and things where we see that there was a lot of need. So we started to pursue that as an option right away.
Mm-hmm. Paola, one of the ways that you came into this project was these kinds of adaptive reuse projects take a long time, particularly when it's a city asset and an older building. I believe that Overton Elementary was built in 1969, correct?
63.
63.
Mm-hmm.
And largely to serve at that point the growing community and what was then Robert Taylor homes, which have since been demolished. When you came into the project, the question was, if this is going to be vacant for a while until it can be repurposed, what can we do with this space? Can you talk a little bit about how you first found out about this opportunity and how you approached that community activation?
Sure. I think I was teaching a summer course at the time, and it was also the beginning of Borderless. So, as a new practice, I was thinking, I want to do commission work, yes, but I also want to use Borderless as an opportunity to contribute and create a larger agenda. So it was that moment in which, I love research and thinking, beyond the surface issues that we see, and looking at opportunities for topics for this summer course that I was teaching. I was looking at, what are pending items in the city of Chicago. When I just started looking at, schools, I ran into this article, and then, the next article, and next link, and the next link, and it takes you to all this backstory because I totally missed in 2013, and probably as many other people that live in Chicago, and I just couldn't believe it. It was just kind of diving into a horror story after the other, and I was thinking, what could I do from a design practice perspective to contribute to the topic other than, creating dialogue? My instinct was convening, just bring people together that are in different fields. So we started having conversations. Ghian and I reconnected through that process. I was just trying to think how, it wasn't that it was a clear idea on how to address an issue of that caliber, but my instincts like bring people together. And I started learning about many of the schools that were closing and having conversations like people like Ghian. What are the plans? What is the process? What do you think? Like those projects were super challenging. It was very clear to me those projects, every single building was going to have a hard time redeveloping. So when Ghian started sharing his vision and we started talking about it, I'm like, we need to do something in between. This is not going to happen in a significant period of time. And my other instinct was I was just coming out from this other opportunity of working with University of Chicago and Arts and Public Life. So I had something that made me think, well, how can the arts, right? How design arts can keep these places active and connected. I'm not a visual artist, so I don't do painting, I don't do sculpture, but I do maps. I do a lot of maps every day on my desk. And I was thinking well, how can we bring visibility to some of these issues with some data? But data that feels interesting and fun, and in a way that people are not expecting it.
And one of the visual projects created, since you just mentioned the map, was the map of Chicago, mapping out some of the high-profile closures. Can you talk a little bit about how that project came together and who was actually involved in making it a real thing?
Yeah, so the hardest thing in this early research part was finding aggregated information. Mm-hmm. CPS website about sites was not the greatest, not accessible. The Chicago Report at the time was doing the best mapping and inventory. So it was just a matter of assembling a visual, a map in this case, a series of outlines. And I was teaching at the time at the School of the Art Institute. So I remember when I was telling Ghian about this idea, it wasn't even like a well-formulated project. Like, what if we, do some installations and, the outdoor of the building? I did not know even how to, convey what I was trying to do. So he said, yes, I don't know exactly what you're trying to do, but sure, let's
go for it.
Go for it. I'm always thinking about visibility. How can we make this thing the most visible possible? And I think I brought some students, I brought some colleagues, I just started calling people. The first, like transferring a drawing that fits on a letter-sized sheet to a 90 by 120 feet drawing, that's the whole process, right? So I remember some of my students that were helping at the time, they were like, how are we going to do this? Are we going to put a projector and a drone? And I'm like, no. This is more analog and simple than that. We're going to create a grid, we're going to transfer a drawing from a grid system and scale it up. So I was teaching at the same time that we were attempting to do these projects in a parking lot. In the south side of Chicago in a closed school. It was really fun to figure out, how to work with a drawing as a form of collaboration, but also as a form of, having a presence, because that project took a number of months. I can't remember exactly, from the tracing to the painting to, kind of figuring out. So what it was really cool to learn about that process was that we were out there, sometimes bring your music, bring some water, but the fact that we were physically doing things in the parking lot, people will come and, neighbors walking by would be curious, what are you doing? So then it was an excuse to have a dialogue. Well, we're trying to think about, and, my students who never probably been to the south side of Chicago, talking to neighbors, like longtime neighbors, So for me, it was an aha moment when I realized having a presence through projects, no matter what the project was going to be the key for keeping the schools active.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's the formal urban designer way of telling the story that I'm about to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So she's right. She came and said, hey, can I do something here? I'm thinking about a map in the parking lot. I'm thinking, you're kind of crazy. You want to do a map in the parking lot? Sure, go for it. And she comes with the students, that's true. And they're kind of looking at it. But most days, 90% of the days, it was Paola out there with 40, 50 rolls of Scotch tape, making a grid, outlining the shape of the city of Chicago. We all know, generally speaking, what the city of Chicago looks like, but she's out there literally making it. Mexican lady in an all-black neighborhood by herself in a parking lot. Now, we have activities going on in the gym, and so people are coming out like, what are you doing? You know, and but it took some months, but she was out there doing this thing, making the grid, and then the shape of the city, and then placing the schools. And nobody really understood what it was until she did it, right? And then once the activation started, the brilliance of it started to show up, right? Most of these closings were in black neighborhoods, right? So when you get a group of people to actually come out to whether or not they were looking at the building or they were looking at the activations, now when you got a group of people, it's a diverse group of people. And there was one time where this happened, we actually captured it on a drone shot. Everybody go to your neighborhood. You remember this? Mm-hmm. Everybody go to your neighborhood. It showed a lot of things, right? The white people all went to their neighborhoods. There were no closed schools. The Latino people went to their neighborhood, 1 or 2 closed schools. The black people went to their neighborhoods, all the closed schools.
Standing on the map where they were mapped out.
So you got a chance to see the black people were only with the black people, the white people were only with the white people. It showed the segregation. It showed the inequality of it. And that's really when I think you started to really see the brilliance of this thing that people could actually touch and say, this is actually where I live. The city is big. We were just driving here to the studio, and I was like, I don't really know the north side like that, right? It's a different world for me. Unless I'm going to the Cubs game or something like that, I'm not really on the north side too much. And this map is one of those things that did that. It allowed people to see in person the stats that we talk about, right? When you talk about the south or the west side, it personalized it because it was on the south side from the north side was only 20 steps, or the west side was 15 steps. It showed you in a different kind of way, that visual illustration.
Mm-hmm. Ghian, I wanted to ask about that point that you just mentioned specifically as well, that the school closures were disproportionately in majority black neighborhoods, especially on the west and south sides. Yes. And projects like this map showed that. A lot of those neighborhoods have suffered substantial population loss after the last few decades, which is not the only reason, but part of the reason why a lot of those schools closed in the first place, since the number of students went down. How can neighborhoods and the people in those neighborhoods think about how assets like these, like a school that have been serving kids for generations, when they go offline, how those buildings can still be community anchors in ways other than an educational institution?
Yeah. I think to do that, it takes someone to facilitate the conversation, right? If you think about the Washington Park community, the second smallest of the 77 communities in the city of Chicago, they're 8 million square feet of city-owned land. So this is a small area with all vacant land. So if I'm a kid and the only thing I've ever seen is vacant land, how do I imagine anything here except vacant land? Right? What should go here? I could say a house, but I don't have the ability to kind of dream any bigger because I haven't seen anything else, right? So I think that it takes conversations to have, like, what are the things that we need? Oftentimes, we need Whole Foods. Well, do we really need Whole Foods, right? We need Starbucks. Do we really need Starbucks? It takes someone to ask these questions. And what you really start to uncover when you have these is, it's not that we need Whole Foods or we need Starbucks, but we do need a place to buy groceries. We do need a place to convene. We do want to feel respected, right? And so some of those things are symbols of being respected, of having a nice comfortable, clean place to sit and meet your neighbors and have a conversation, right? And so a lot of times that's what I think Paola created. It was interesting that was the large city map. There was another map that was done, which was a map of Bronzeville. And how that map was actually populated was people in the community stopping by, or if there was an event at the school, stopping by and saying, tell us about what are the important things here in this community, right? And it wasn't necessarily the museum or the L stop. It might have been your favorite restaurant or the barbershop, right? And so it gave you a different perspective of community from the community's perspective, right? And so those are the kinds of conversations that'll happen. To be able to see a young person say, wow, I live here. This place is important because this is where I live. Or my school is right here. This place is important. And so it started different kinds of conversations, not only conversations within the neighborhood, but it allowed us to have conversations with city officials, with philanthropy, with corporate, saying like, hey, we all have to be a part of this solution. Because it wasn't just how do we get to the place where it was vacant land. There were policies that were put in place that created the environment for it. Redlining, restrictive covenants, all of these kinds of policies that were put in place that were meant to keep Black people in a negative state. And so obviously this is the result. And that took a long time for us to get there. And so these policies were put in place. And we see the result, the vacant land, the closed schools. There need to be policies put in place to fix these problems, right? If these problems took 60, 70, 80 years to get us to the situation, it may take us 60, 70, 80 years to get out of this situation. But there needs to be the same kind of attention that was put on it, right? And involve the people that were harmed by this in creating the solution. That was so brilliant what I thought about what Paola did with her team about bringing community in to come up with some of the solutions.
And Paola, on that note, a theme for Strong Towns as an organization is what is the next smallest thing we can do to make a difference, and figuring out how to do that right now to build on that. What are some ways that the activations you've done of the space and the way that you brought people from the community and your students, other parts of the city in, what is the spirit of the next smallest thing you did, and how did that lead to some other discoveries or other developments?
You know, once you ask, is there something you want to contribute to anyone? The answer is yes. So we started, while the map was being drawn, there was this arts professor and a teaching artist, and they already had been in touch with Ghian and like, hey, our students are engaging with reimagining the school and whatnot. They already had a small exhibition. So that for me was like, oh, this is a space where people can imagine. So while I was walking, one of the first times walking the building, I think they had done installations, right, in different classrooms. And that was for me an inspiration. I'm like, anyone can do this. Like, if you open the doors and you facilitate that people have access, I'm sure a lot of other students would be interested. And that was the first thing I facilitated, that people would have access to the building and, bring their own installation. So it was taking a classroom. The first iteration of, this year, I don't know how to call it, design festival activation, it was 8 by 8 because there were 8 classrooms per floor, and then, or 8 by 3, sorry. And then there were 3 floors. So you have 24 opportunities to imagine something. And, I started organizing. So putting a little poster together, little flyers, and through email, like people I know, and people were just signing up. And, this was all volunteer. It was all, you have an idea. These are kind of the rules and the values and the guidelines. It was mostly about tell a story about the past, tell a story about the present, tell about a story about the future that has to do with this place. So it was not just parachuting things, but like you had to think through the process of learning something about the space and sharing something in the form of design or art or some form of installation. So first you had to learn about Bronzeville, right? If you weren't from Bronzeville, you had to learn about Anthony Overton. You had to learn about why the schools closed. You could imagine what could come next. So it was an excuse to have people reflect about the place they were actually working on and put something where they had something to say about it. So, it started from classroom activations to outdoor installations, activations. So it just became like a takeover of the different spaces. We started transition more to be outdoors because it was more visible. Again, the visibility, right? We want to make sure like every time we're there, neighbors will see us, and that was a good excuse to come. So, later came like every time people would come with an idea, it's like, okay, how can we make that happen? So ideas about community gardens, and we want to have always like barbecues and things out. So let's put some tables out. Let's put like a little canopy out, so we have protection from rain or sun. So it was always about listening to what people wanted to do in the space and like put in the little pieces to do that.
And it sounds like long after it was officially a school, it was still a place of learning, a place of collaboration, a third space.
Absolutely. So that was for me very important. Like, how do we keep the space being a space for exchange? You're learning something, you bring something to the table, you take something with you. So always this cycle of learning something, giving something. I'm always about thinking how spaces can facilitate that dialogue. Because just by talking, we learn from each other, we learn something new. And then those conversations yield to more ideas.
The other part, though, that I just want to make sure to call out is that it wasn't just Paola coming in, bringing her students. It always involved people from the community, which was important, right? Because whether or not if it was Stacy who lived across the street who was cleaning up, right, or some of the moms whose kids were playing in the gym. Yes. It was always an element of making sure that this was authentic and the people from the community were represented, not just outsiders coming in. But the outsiders soon became a part of the community. They knew everybody in the neighborhood after being there for a while, and even their perceptions about the neighborhood changed, right? This is a place where we want the same things that everybody else wants, right? In whatever community you live in. And so people quickly became a part of it. There were times when one of Paola's students, Gordon, when we'd be like, hey, man, it's nighttime, man. You can't be out here like this. It's time to go, right? But Gordon became a part of the neighborhood, and he fit right in.
Or, Kenya,
yeah.
Across the street, our garden steward. She's been working with us for 3 years now. And, sometimes she's like texting me like, hey, what's going on with, she is like paying attention to what's happening because she's across the street, and she loves coming and, tend to the garden and, bring her son to enjoy the basketball court or like any of the, activities for kids. But you're right. It's this combination, right, of, the energy that produces having people from the neighborhood, but also others that may not be as familiar. I'm super proud that I think there's a lot of people that had gone for the first time to the South Side, for the first time to Brownsville in the last 8 years that we've been there.
And it wasn't just people from Chicago, it was people from around the world, right? Chicago Architectural Biennial came, and so there were teams from around the world. There were people coming to Chicago that would normally only stay down on the Magnificent Mile that were now coming to Brownsville. The other part, though, that you talked about small things that I want to highlight is with the work that Paola did, the way that she did it. You got to learn something. You got to add to this. It was modeling behavior, right? So Lefty is the guy who kind of oversees the property for us. And so once a month in the summer months, it's something called Community Days. And there's a theme, and it's like a big block party kind of thing. And so after a couple of times of doing this, Lefty observed, and he wanted to do his own community day. And he did his own community day, as Paola gave some advice, and he set his own thing up. And then during COVID, when the world shut down, my daughter asked me, hey, Dad, can I go in one of the classrooms and paint? Sure. Can I invite a friend? Sure. And before I knew it, every classroom was full, essentially mimicking the same thing that Paola had done. Every young person doing something creative. They had one room that was a meeting room where they had a mandatory rule. They had to meet once a day to kind of talk about what they were doing and how they could work together. So they created this community in a time when community was kind of falling apart, right? Overton became a place for mutual aid where they gave out diapers and food and water and, all kinds of things that in a time of need, this place kind of became a true sense of community to understand what are the needs and how do we serve those needs. And so it was kind of being the example, but then allowing others to kind of say, I can do this too.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that when you were first looking at purchasing the property, when it came for sale, one of the things you were looking at is whether the building could be designated as historical. Could you talk a little bit about why that's important, why that impacted the project, and what are some of the considerations, both for the better and making it a little more challenging, that come with doing that kind of a project?
Sure. Well, my first instinct was the money. There's a federal historic tax credit that provides you basically 20%. It is 20% of the total cost of the project. So if it was a $10 million project, there's a $2 million tax credit that you can go sell on the market to get $1.5 million to help fund the project. At the same time, we were working in Springfield to try to get a state historic tax credit that existed in some other states that has now passed. So from a financial perspective, having this place designated historic, it provided us with a significant amount of dollars. The other part of it is that, if we continue to tear down the buildings that we have in our city, right? You go to Rome, what if they just decided, oh man, this Coliseum, man, this is old, man, we're not having these games anymore. Let's just tear it down. You lose your history, right? This was an important part of Chicago history. Mm-hmm. And if we tear these places down, then you lose it. Architecturally, it was beautiful. I'm not an architect, so I couldn't tell you about this particular style or that style that an architect could. But the students from IIT down the street, they're going to say, oh, this is a Bauhaus. They're going to be able to talk to those things, and it means something to that person specifically. We found an article where the actual architect who designed the building, he said, look, I'm designing this as a school today, but it may not always be a school. It may be something else in the future. So that also inspired us. The challenging part about doing it historic is that you got to follow the rules of it being historic, right? So schools are, from a real estate development perspective, they're inefficient. They're wide hallways. Whatever we're going to build now is not going to require these wide hallways. It's not going to require a boy's bathroom and a girl's bathroom and 4 stalls in each one. It's going to be a totally different set of rules, right? But that's the sacrifice you have to make in order to get that tax credit. So those are just some of the challenges that we faced with it. But at the end of the day, we kind of feel like it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. And Paola, architecturally, as someone who's an urban designer, what is it about the building and the grounds at Overton that gave unique opportunities for people to experience the space and be inspired by that?
Yeah, well, Overton was designed at a time where, it's the 60s. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of thoughts about, progressive thinking, like what is the future of education? So how that manifested at Overton and the modernism movement was, open, like natural light. Very few schools with this amount of windows, right? Imagine natural light everywhere. And when you're inside the building, you just feel, the feeling of being inside in those hallways and those classrooms is incredible. And also, this very, simple, systematic way of organizing the building. It's 3 pods, but they all feel their own village, mm-hmm. right? So from a design perspective, you have all this organization of a building that allows you to feel it as a whole, but also you feel it in different pockets. And I think, the only thing that I think modernism and architecture didn't do very well was the relationship between indoor, outdoor, right? We're always kind of going around to, connect interior. That's why we decided just to start activating only the exterior, because the interior-exterior relationship of that building is a little bit different, right? So, but I think all in all, there's spaces that, the transparency of the building, the visual connection with the interior it's phenomenal. So I think from an architectural standpoint of view, I think what the building conveys is a lot of optimism about, what's possible. And, as Ghian mentioned, the feeling of these classrooms converted into an office space and that that idea of flexibility, what can this building become in the future, is very much present. You can feel the space can be something else. You stand in one of those classrooms, it's like, this is an office space completely, like the feeling. And I really appreciate that about that design. And we've been, talking a lot about, the advantages of designing in that way with flexibility.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you mentioned that the style almost makes it natural to convert to office use or business incubator use. Architecturally, it looks similar to some of the skyscrapers that went up around that time, right? Modernist, lot of glass, metal everywhere, different layout, obviously, because of the scale of the building.
Yeah. And it challenged all conventions, right? If you ask an educator, what do you think about this class? They're terrible because kids can look everywhere and they get distracted. We learn, 2025, now we know the learning doesn't happen in the classroom or in the ways that we were taught. Yes, there are moments for focus and you need to focus, but there are other moments of discovery and more other forms of learning. So, depends who you ask, but definitely it's so beautiful to see, you're standing on a corner classroom, you can see all the way through. That visual relationship just gives a very different character to that building. So it's fun, when we activated the building, we have this installation on the third floor, and then even people, looking down to the map. So it was all these vantage points. It was really a really dynamic place.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, there's a couple of classrooms where you feel like you're sitting in a treehouse. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't just they designed the buildings, they selected what kind of trees were going to be there. And you feel like you're sitting in a treehouse when you're up there, and it's just so much light coming in. It's an incredible space. And so that's what I kind of said, like, I imagine what was it like to be a student here. Like, this would have been an incredible place of learning, I felt like, right? And so that was one of those things. We want to make sure that it remained an asset and a place of learning for the community.
One of the things that I remember the most, one of the first years that we were working on this was you talking about keeping the lights on at night.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And one of the first biennials, so we're working late to finish our installations. So the building lights were on, and it was this lantern, right? The building is as a lantern. So keeping the lights on was so important for you to signal, someone cares about the space. Someone is keeping the lights on. Someone is, thinking about what to do with it. So I think for me it was super meaningful, but also experiencing that from, being late hours at Overton some days. It's an incredible, place that should be preserved. And the other thing that, we learned was everything about Anthony Overton, which I did, you come to Chicago as someone who's not from Chicago, the first thing you learn is Daniel Burnham, and then he does incredible plans for the city, and you never hear in the same caliber about Jane Addams, right, who did probably like equally counterpart in like the social impact work, if we wanted to call it. But then
Whole House and
all the tenements and educating immigrants. That was just it's an incredible story that I don't think gets as highlighted as Daniel Burnham. Daniel Burnham did a lot of good things, don't get me wrong. But then I learned about Anthony Overton. This man, comes to Chicago after a series of challenged, failed businesses. He comes from the South, Louisiana, Kansas. He makes it to Chicago, and he establishes some of the most incredible businesses dedicated to Black people. And, he goes from hygienic products. He goes from founding The Bee, the newspaper, civic leadership. He understands storytelling. It's important for the business, but also for the community. And he goes on and on and on until, being able to even establish a national bank that would allow Black people to have access to money. So I don't remember how many years I'd been in Chicago, never heard about this character that is incredibly impactful. And, every time the kids come to Overton, like, do you know who Overton is? Well, now you're going to know.
Right.
So the storytelling of that for me has been super, super significant as part of this project.
He had a competition for the newspaper, The Bee, to name the neighborhood, and you ended up with the name Bronzeville. Prior to it being called Bronzeville, it was called Darky Town, right? And so you think about the importance of that. Who's going to say that that's the neighborhood that they live in, Darky Town? And so he comes up with this. And so you ask people today, how did it get the name Bronzeville? No one knows that. but it was through the B. He had a competition to come up with this name that people are really proud of now.
Mm-hmm. He helped name the neighborhood as people know it today, so it's natural that one of the neighborhood institutions take his name as well.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask about the project and where it stands now and how it might be changing in the future. So this project has been a long time in the works. When the schools were originally closed was 2013. It's 12 years later now, and some of the renovation work has broken ground recently. Ghian, can you talk a little bit about where things are now in that stage of trying to turn it into a business incubator, community space, what that timeline looks like, and how some of these community uses of the space, outdoors and indoors, might change as the building goes into more active use?
Yeah, so we pretty much immediately got the federal historic tax credits. A little bit later, the state tax credit, we got that award, but that was it. We could not get any help from the city. We couldn't get any help from philanthropy. We couldn't get any help from corporate. It was only during COVID when those other things started to come. So we received some additional grants from philanthropy and ultimately from the city received one of the Chicago Recovery grants. So the drawings are all finished now. We're going in for a permit. Demolition has started. Some of the masonry work has started. And so we're hoping to go all out starting this spring, June, and start construction. I don't expect that much is going to change, right? We want outside to continue to be a part of the community. So today, if it's a Bears game, the community comes out with a projector and they watch the Bears games, right? We want to continue to have community days. This has been something that's been established now and something that people look forward to. So that'll continue. What's the former gym will be a multi-use space. It'll be available to the people in the building, but it'll also be available to people in the community. You wrote a play, you want to host a play someplace, you can have it there. Or you teach an aerobics class, you need a place to have it. We want you to be able to have that there, right? But then there's no office space in our community, right? There may be some storefronts. So you have an idea, something you want to start, we have some spaces that's available for you. The old cafeteria, there's going to be a teaching kitchen to teach healthy eating, right? But it can also service the building. So in a lot of ways, we want this place to continue to be this place of activity, to hear the laughter that was once in the schoolyards, to continue to fill that up. And we've had a lot of fun over the last couple of years. Actually, believe it or not, one of the hard parts about getting financing, because it was activated so much, everybody thought the building was open. Because we actually activated it that much, right? But it was so it was a challenge, but it was also a sense of pride that we did not let this place go dark.
And Paola, in terms of where Overton fits in the larger landscape of public buildings closing down, and specifically the public school closures, you produced a documentary, Beyond Closure, about the 2013 closures of the 50 schools, and telling stories. Overton was one of them. There were two other schools you focused on. Within the landscape of all of those schools and where they are now 12 years later, how does the experience of what you've been able to do at Overton compare with some of the way those other spaces have or haven't been activated where they are today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure we're the only project in the city where, the grounds of the school have stay active for this long. Let me step back because I want to just link back to the original idea when Ghian was talking about his vision and all the planning for development of Overton. I was like, that's great. It's going to take a lot of time, but that's also invisible work. It doesn't mean when the buildings are closed and board, it doesn't mean someone is not doing that work on the backstage, right? And that's probably true for a lot of the other buildings. But I thought that's something that people don't know about. And when you're harmed by the closure of a school, you don't care what's going on in backstage. You really want to see how the space is accessible to you. So I say that to say I've been in touch with these other places because the research has been ongoing, and I always kept the organizations that are featured in the film. They're organizations that I follow their work and I just know about what they do, and they happen to be connected with these two building projects, Woods Academy in Inglewood and Overton Elementary in Austin. But it was a little bit of comparing notes, right? So over the years, I kept, like, how are you dealing with that? What are the challenges? Until I thought it was important to just do a storytelling exercise so we can capture that and not only compare the projects, but the threads that, we can pull from those examples about, some of those projects that are dependent on a lot of money that comes from public resources. Their timeframes are just ridiculous sometimes, right? One of them was, I think it was in the middle of COVID too, but the cost of the redevelopment double, if not more, because of the time span that these projects have to endure. Mm-hmm. So, if you start with a $10 million, it's probably $25 million now. Emmett started with, I don't know, $20 million. Now it's over $40 million. So that being told publicly makes you think differently about how challenging it is to redevelop these buildings, right? And then the other thread to pull from those examples was, there are different types of partnerships that take place for these projects to happen. And I wanted to feature also how all of them are community-led. Very few of them have had city support. It's like community saying, like, no one's going to come and rescue us. So we're going to have to figure this out. It's not fair at all. It's not equitable at all. But, not waiting to be rescued. I think that's also the part of the story. Mm-hmm. Even though, it's a call for action to, our city. And as Ghian was mentioning, that should be a partnership. It should be something that, gets done in partnership and with the leadership and creativity of the city as well. Our cities are very creative for other things, but when it comes to, dealing with this very, very, harming results from inequity, can we be creative as well? And can we be bold? And can we, make the call, like the demand for, like, we need help to deal with this issue that we didn't cause in the first place?
And, I think another really important part, though, that we have to highlight is that, yes, these schools were closed on the south and west side, but it's not just the problem of the south and west side. Mm. It's all of our problems, right? And everyone, north side, downtown, it's everyone's responsibility to try to solve this, because what impacts the south side ultimately has an impact on the entire city, the state. And so I don't think it's fair to say, well, that's a problem of the west side, right? Or that's a problem of the south side. No, it ultimately impacts the entire city.
What are some things about your experience at Anthony Overton Elementary that you would hope city leaders or other people trying to improve their communities could learn from?
I have a question. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I have a question. How does it look like to redevelop the schools in an equitable and just way? And what that looks like for me is, we need to get community involved. Mm-hmm. And no one should be bootstrapping to engage their community and do this work. This is what we've been struggling with. And, we made a decision to commit resources and energy to do it. But no community should be doing this on our own, period. So, okay, then what are the city resources, right? Is there a dedicated staff members? Is there a dedicated initiative, task force, whatever you want to call it? Other cities have done it. It's not just, putting a plan together and off you go. It's like, no. What are the resources associated to making these plans happen? Because that's what the closing of schools in Chicago was. There was a plan that never got executed, not even taken seriously. There were studies, many people, contributed to that early thinking, but none of that was executed because there was no financial mechanisms associated with any of these ideas. There was no real study about what were the implications of funding necessary to do, what are the scenarios. There was just like, okay, there are these buildings, we're going to dispose them as usual, as if they were, electrical substations or fire stations. Like, no, you can't just do that. So when I say being creative, what I mean is, how do you recognize that schools are a different kind of asset, create a process and a plan, and then the resources and funding attached to it. So that's what, for me, an equitable and just process starts to look like.
Ghian, do you have thoughts on that?
I don't have much more to add. I mean, I think she summarized it in a really good way. The one thing that I would call out is, these were school closings, and the group that was not spoken to was the kids. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that I learned so much. Paola talked about the kids from Williams coming over. And so they asked me, hey, what are you going to turn the building into? I said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to turn the building into. I'm going to ask you, what should I turn the building into? And the same kinds of ideas that we were developing, the young people came up with it. We should have a gym. We should have a cafe. We should have a place where I can do catering, a podcast studio. You know, a computer lab. They told us what the needs were in the community, right? So those voices were just as important as the people with the gray hair voices. And we tend to ignore them, right? But they're the ones ultimately that we're doing this for. They were the ones most directly impacted, and they're the ones ultimately who are going to be our leaders, that in these processes, when we are thinking about the future of neighborhoods, those are probably the most important voices.
And in terms of how this can help have ripple effects on the neighborhood, not just in how the building and the grounds are being used, but what they enable or inspire people to do in other parts of the neighborhood with housing, with businesses, with transportation. What are some of those ripple effects that you hope will come out of this, or you've seen early signs of?
Yeah, so I mean, it's my hope that someone starts in a classroom that's about 1,000 square feet and they grow it, or they move from their home to a classroom to a storefront. Right, that someone opens a business and now they can afford to buy a house on the vacant lot that's next door. Right, that someone can learn how to cook healthy eating, and now maybe they won't suffer from generations of diabetes. Right, where they can come and hang out with a friend in a safe place. Right, so I mean, I think we think of this as a hub and spoke model, that this can just be the beginning. And much like how Paola started community days and it replicated itself, how do you do that, right? So what happens with the other closed schools in the neighborhoods? There's still a whole bunch of them that are still boarded up. So can you replicate that process? Maybe it's a different flavor because it's a different flavor of that particular neighborhood or that school. So maybe it's a little, but you have a format that you can use and say, there's one model that we can use, and let's see if that works over here. Let's do that differently because this is the Southwest side or this is the West side. We're not going to do it exactly the way they did it at Overton. We're going to do it in our own way, our own traditions, our own cultures, right? But maybe let's invite the people from Overton over to tell us what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's inspiring. I keep saying what we do, there's nothing exceptional or magical about it. We're determined to do it. And I think the important part is do it consistently. You have to do it over and over and over and over. And it hasn't come up the same way every year. Sometimes, we get additional resources. Sometimes we don't have much. You just show up and, do something and things start happening. Connect with people and things keep happening. So I learned about stewardship. Right, stewardship models. Like Ghian was saying, like just sometimes it's being there, keeping the space alive, and people come in with their own ideas, and we try to support them. We try to empower. People take ownership of the space and being stewards. I love that word because it doesn't exist in Spanish. Number one, stewardship, and I love it because it's this idea that you have the power, or I have the power. Everyone has the power. We just need to, in community, we're stronger because we complement each other's resources or, skill sets or perspectives. So coming together and working together and showing up together, for me, that's some of the things that I want to see replicated in other places. Because what we do, it's great that it's happening and we're able to, but like we're one school out of, 50 that closed, but even today or as of last year 2024, 26 of them were still closed, right? So 50% of those buildings are still boarded, and I just imagine what would it feel for a young person to walk by those buildings every day. That's a clear message. My city doesn't care about this place that is in my neighborhood next to where I live, where I walk. So for me, that thought process, that thought is devastating. That shouldn't happen to any young person in Chicago. They should all feel supported with places of high quality. And I think one of the, this is a conversation that takes many forms about how do we advocate for this. But the person that does say it very clearly for me, it's Nikita Brar, who's also featured in the film, former executive director of Chicago United for Equity, where she says, what if Chicago was the most amazing city to grow, for young people to grow? And just the vision of that takes away all like, I believe in this, I believe that, should be that. If we all believe in that vision, you know, of course we need to do something with our schools. Of course we need to do something with all our underinvested neighborhoods, underutilized assets. So I think just taking the larger view, like who is this for and who will benefit from this, takes away a lot of the nonsense that sometimes I get to hear about like, oh, no, Paola, that's not possible. Stop telling me how I cannot do things. Please give me ideas on how could be a pathway. I'm good at like connecting dots and threading things, but just help me to see a little bit what could be a pathway.
Mm-hmm. A question I like to ask my guests at the end of the podcast is, what is a project that you're working on right now that you're really excited about and you'd like to plug or people to learn more about?
Well, that's the film, which, you know, just got released in December. So we're going like in tour using the film as a tool to have these conversations, because I would like more people in their own way to get involved in some of this work. There's, again, 26 buildings that need still the work. And then we're also working on a book. I call it more of a, you know, a guide to action. You know, I feel I give so many presentations, we do so many talks, but I just want to pass the knowledge also in another way. And empowering people. Like this can be done by any individual. You just need a little bit of like the know-how. And it was like, here's the example, do it your own way. So we're working on a book or a guide to action.
Nice. Man, I got to get Overton done. We getting Overton. Focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, you know, telling the story for me has been very interesting, like doing the work and telling the story, because sometimes I think when we share stories that resonate with people, there's like a multiplier effect that happens. And that's what I've been enjoying, you know, about doing this project. And how do we tell the story? How do we tell the story? So we can actually inspire others or spark their imagination into doing something with their own resources and capacity.
Paola, Ghian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.